Welcome to today's AT&T Cyber Threat Report. This is October 20th, 2011. Joining us today, we have Jim Clausing. Jim is our lead malware analyst. Welcome, Jim. And what do you plan to discuss today?
Today, I'm going to talk about a new piece of malware that's been seen in the wild this week called Duqu that seems to be similar to Stuxnet.
That should be interesting. Stuxnet's notorious for its complexity, so it'll be interesting to talk about that one. We also have John Hogoboom here today. John is our a lead security analyst. He's also an analysis tool developer. Welcome, John. What do you plan to discuss today?
Thanks, Brian. I got two stories that are kind of interesting that we've seen recently. One is about malware that has gotten onto some of the systems related to the Predator drones that the Air Force uses. And another story out of Germany about a piece of malware that the police are using to monitor people's activity. And it's a bit of a controversial one, but we'll take a look at that one.
And it certainly is. There's always some controversy around the law enforcement community and the tools that they use. Certainly as the digital environment gets more complex, also should be some good discussion. We have Dave Gross here today. Dave is a senior incident response analyst. He's our lead for the malware analysis activities. Welcome, Dave. And what do you plan to discuss today?
Thank you, Brian. I have two stories also. I'm going to be talking about a new variant of a Mac OS X Trojan that disables software updates. And also, I'm going to talk about some expansion of Google's SSL program, how they're making SSL default for logged-in users, and talk about some of those issues.
That sounds good. So we have a full plate today. I'm Brian Rexroad, and I'll talk about our Internet weather report for the week. And of course, as always, I want to remind everybody that if you'd like to contact us, if you have feedback on the program, questions about what we've talked about, recommendations on what we should cover, please give us a line at cyberthreat@list.att.com. And so let's go and talk a little bit about this Duqu. Jim?
Thanks, Brian. In the last couple of days, we've seen a number of the major antivirus companies, Symantec, McAfee, F-Secure, have all posted analyses of a piece of malware that they got that seems to have been targeted at some folks in Europe. And during the course of this analysis, they've determined that at least 50% of the code in this new malware is identical to code from Stuxnet. Stuxnet, as you may or may not recall, was some malware that was targeting control systems, seems to be targeted at Iran, at their nuclear program. It was discovered in June of 2010, I believe, really started making noise in the fall. But this new piece of malware appears to share at least 50% of its code with Stuxnet. So it appears that if it's not the same authors, they at least had access to the source code. This new malware doesn't appear to be targeted at the same kind of industrial control as the previous one, and there's some question as to what the purpose of this is. Most of the antivirus vendors that have analyzed it suggest that this appears to be preliminary reconnaissance for another Stuxnet-type attack against critical infrastructure later on. But so far, there are two variants that have been seen in the wild of this. One has signed code and the other doesn't. But they're both very similar, and at present they seem to drop a keylogger on infected systems. But as I said, right now it looks like this is mostly reconnaissance and maybe precursor to another Stuxnet-like attack, but it isn't yet targeted at those kind of critical systems yet.
Yeah, so help me understand a little more clearly here. I think it was my impression that this still had sort of a SCADA target associated with it. Is that true or not true? I mean, I heard it was definitely more generic than Stuxnet was, but is SCADA still a target?
Well, it's not entirely clear. The folks who initially have been infected and discovered it have chosen to remain anonymous. They passed the malware on to the antivirus vendors, and we've got a sample that I haven't had a chance to look at yet. But what we do know is they were in Europe. Some reports say that they might have been sort of SCADA-related or CA-related, but I haven't seen any hard evidence, and I haven't seen any place that's told exactly who it is that's been infected so far.
Jim, I thought I read that they had the original Stuxnet had some payload that had to do with the centrifuges and stuff like that, right, for the nuclear industry. And in this variant, that has been removed, right?
Right. That particular code that was targeting the controls is not present in this variant. That's why they are saying right now that it looks like it's mostly just recon, and that it's probably a precursor to another Stuxnet-like attack.
Right. And another thing I read about it, it seemed like there was some code in there where it would remove itself after a short amount of time, after 36 days or 38 days or something like that. So this way, if you don't find it quickly, it kind of disappears. Did you see the same thing?
I hadn't seen that, and like I said, I haven't yet had a chance to analyze the sample that we got. We just got it this morning, so.
Okay.
But I hadn't seen that.
Yeah. Well, that's a really short time when you're, talking about detecting an APT threat before it goes away.
Now when Stuxnet came out, there was a lot of discussion around maybe this is some kind of state-sponsored thing. I haven't really seen any hubbub in that regard this time, but I don't know. Has anybody else seen that?
Yeah, because the previous one there was talk about whether it was, sponsored by the U.S. Defense Department or Israel or something like that. I've also seen a little speculation that because so much of the code is the same, maybe this was also, but we haven't really seen anybody definitively say where the original came from, so
right.
All speculation. But I've seen a little speculation there, but the targets that they've seen so far what I've been able to tell, don't seem to be the same kind of folks that would necessarily be targeted by the state-sponsored.
What I found to be interesting, I looked at the Symantec report in particular, and there was they looked at a number of different attributes: the modularity, the functionality, the way it was structured, the way even I think files were named, and there were a significant number of similarities between the two. It was also interesting that they still had a number of question marks. I think, Jim, you very much have pointed out that it's not really clear what the function is here, whereas, after doing some analysis on Stuxnet, it was better understood. Another thing that's sort of interesting here, I was kind of thinking back to the Shady Rat report that came out. I think McAfee originated it, but then there was a little controversy about between different antivirus vendors and some disagreement about how serious it was, that sort of thing. I haven't seen Kaspersky chime in on this topic yet. Clearly, we've heard from Symantec, McAfee, and F-Secure. They seem to be all in agreement with respect to this one. I remember back, Kaspersky was he didn't really doubt that there was significance associated with the Shady Rat. But what I found to be really significant is that the main point that he was making is that we shouldn't discount the significance of a lot of these other botnet activities that take place. So there's a tendency is to have the big rocks, float to the top, and almost, make it easy to forget about what, other botnet activities. I know we've spent a lot of time and effort on Zeus and SpyEye, and so, this is an important finding, but it's we also need to keep our eye on the bigger picture here.
Absolutely.
All right, very good. Thank you for this. And next we have Dave. I hear there's a new Trojan out there.
Yes, thank you, Brian. There's a new variant of a Trojan that was discovered fairly recently. The Trojan is called Flashback, and it's targeted at Mac OS X. It was discovered back in September, and what it did in its A variant was connecting to remote server and sending back stolen information, MAC address, and some other information that it rummaged through and found on the system. Evidently, last week there was another variant that was discovered, Flashback B, which prevents itself from being run in a virtualized environment. A lot of the malware analysts will take a lot of these pieces of malware and try to understand it in virtual environments, and so this is a typical tactic that's used by the malware writers to stop these things from being analyzed by detecting that it's running in a virtual environment and preventing it. So in the last couple days, there's another variant that's been detected also, and I think I don't know if it's all of them or just this last one. I think it's all of them pretend to be a fake Flash player installer, but this most recent variant will actually disable the XProtect, which is the recent software that Apple has put on the Macs to do anti-malware there. It'll prevent it from doing its update. So it'll go in and kill the information in the system that allows XProtect to find the place to get new signatures and stuff. So I just wanted people to be aware. It's not clear how many people are actually infected by this at this point, but it looks like this one may be gaining a little bit of steam because it's, doing a lot of things that the malware in other environments have been doing, that really embed themselves, not being able to run in virtualized environments, so it can't be analyzed, and disabling anti-malware so it can stick around for a while and things like that. So this is an up-and-coming threat.
So Dave, do you have some insight into what the typical infection vector is for this one?
No, I hadn't seen anywhere where they described what the infection vector was.
Okay. I mean, I think it's interesting here that Flash Player. Help me here. I have to admit that I'm not much of a Mac OS user, but does Flash Player work in Mac OS?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a Flash. Okay, so it's just iPhone where it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I think that's a significant aspect of this. So there is such thing as a real Flash player that exists for Mac OS, but this one happens to be a fake one. Obviously, you don't want to get suckered by that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that it's a lot of the tactics that we've seen in the Windows malware are now starting to show up in this Mac malware. One of the things that interests me, though, is recently I've seen actually fewer malware samples checking for a virtualized environment, and I think that's partially due to the movement to cloud, where we've got where all this stuff is running on virtual machines. I think the malware, if it refuses to run in a virtual environment is cutting itself off. So I suspect that that's one of the reasons in the Windows malware that we haven't seen as many samples recently that check for a virtualized environment first. But I think it's interesting that the Mac malware is starting to when the Windows malware is slowing down.
Right. But I'm not sure how much there is right now in terms of running Mac-type stuff in the cloud, as there is, there's probably a lot more available for running PC stuff in the cloud.
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting that, Flash, I probably maybe shouldn't, get on their case too much, but that's a typical program that has a lot of exploits that is used as a vector to infect machines. So the fact that they're actually trying to pretend that they're a Flash player is interesting in and of itself, probably.
Yeah. Ironic?
Yeah,
a little ironic. I guess that's the word I'm searching for.
Yeah, I don't think this is the first time that's been done. I think this perhaps is the first time it's been done against Mac OS in particular, but we've seen a lot of, fake player executables being used as a means to infect other users as well. I sort of asked about this earlier. The question is, does it come through as a link in an email, or are they spamming this out, or are they using some sort of a different sort of exploit to redirect users to this fake installer at a website or something like that? Still a question, and maybe there are some multiple vectors that they're using, but absolutely.
Yep. All right, let me move on to the next topic, which is using SSL for Google access. Google has been pretty aggressively moving towards allowing SSL access for its services. 21 months ago, it introduced SSL for its normal search page. So instead of going to your regular HTTP www.google.com, you can go to the SSL version of it, and this will protect your search query and also protect your the responses, especially if you're in like a public Wi-Fi spot or places where you don't want to be eavesdropped upon. So they offered this initially so that they could have more widespread access to it. With about 17 months ago, they came out with access for their mail. So now the mail, when you go into Google Mail, you go in through SSL. So that is protected, end to end. And what they just announced in their blog is if you're logged into your Google account in the near future, in the next couple weeks, you'll be redirected to use the SSL search by default. So it'll, when you go to the regular www.google.com, it'll redirect you to the SSL version to protect you. And then, if you're not logged in, you can always go to the HTTPS version of the URL. So I just want to make our viewers aware that there are some of these services now where you can go and, get a little bit more protection from some of these wide open Wi-Fi spots, and also, avoid man-in-the-middle kind of attacks and things like that. And they had also mentioned that there are others that are now offering SSL in the last few months. Twitter has an SSL version of their page, and also Facebook. So it looks like more and more of the popular online services are migrating to this. So I just want to make our viewers aware that when they're in some of these open areas, where they're using some of these common hotspots and stuff, they should probably go more towards the SSL version of these.
Yeah, so Dave, I think we talked about this notion about, I'm going to say maybe 20 episodes ago about this topic of, being able to be monitored if you're on a Wi-Fi network. That is when you're sending those packets out into the Wi-Fi network, even if it's an encrypted Wi-Fi network, everybody else that's on that Wi-Fi network is able to see those packets. So clearly there is a privacy protection aspect to this, and also perhaps a spoof protection aspect of this. Mm-hmm. I can't help but sort of play devil's advocate a bit here. How much of this is perhaps so that search sessions can be bound to a specific user? Is this a tracking tool, or is this a security tool?
I don't know. That's a good question. None of the articles seem to, discuss that. But that.
So I think that's something to be thought about. That is, I'm absolutely an advocate of good security in the sessions, but and some people aren't concerned about this thing. But keep in mind that binding your login with an SSL session means that your searches, your email accesses, and other activities that you're doing are perhaps more easily tracked, despite the fact that you may be using a machine that somebody else has previously logged into, or a shared login, or perhaps multiple users behind the same router using the same address on the internet. So,
I mean, some of this stuff also, I think they use cookies and other things to track the users anyhow. So if it's from the same machine, there's probably some tracking there. And also, if you're logged into your Google account, even if you don't use SSL right now, it still is tied to your login, so they can still do that correlation if that's the case. So I'm not sure that adding SSL is really going to change the flavor of that and make it more easily tracked.
No, that's perhaps true. More browsers, as well as I think Firefox has the feature now. Kaspersky has a feature for doing basically a sandbox browser that's intended to protect against tracking functions like that, so that basically it doesn't store things between different sessions. And again, this is perhaps adding a capability that could subvert those protection features if you're concerned about being tracked. Personally, I agree with you. I think the security aspects of this are more important than the tracking aspects of this. If you're using these services that are basically free services, keep in mind there is no free lunch. There's a revenue stream behind this activity. You can choose to use it, choose not to use it. I find them valuable in many cases.
Hey, Dave, I want to ask a question. So are we saying that you can only use the SSL for your search if you're logged in, or is it available even to?
No, it's available even if you aren't logged in, but if you are logged in, it'll default to use SSL, so it'll redirect you there. Okay. But right now you can just go to https www.google.com without having to be logged in and protect your searches that way.
Okay, well that's actually an aspect of this that I wasn't aware of. Good news. All right, thank you, Dave.
All right.
Let's see, next year. John, I guess you have a couple of items for us. What's happening with the U.S. drone fleet here?
I do have some stories. So this came out last week, I think. There was a story, basically, it got out from Wired magazine first, I think, but Air Force has subsequently confirmed that this is actually an accurate story. There's a computer virus that infected the systems involved in not necessarily the Predator itself, but maybe the flight operations of the Predator and Reaper drones. And the malware that got on there is keystroke logging. They've subsequently, I've heard some reports that this malware is mostly involved in kind of keystroke logging, credential logging for like gaming applications and stuff like that. So it's probably, this is me speculating, probably an unintentional, not specifically targeted towards this, and it just happened to get on these machines. A little interesting, in my opinion, that Windows is being used as the the operational operating system for some of these military applications. But, it's interesting that, something like this could get onto a secured system. Obviously, this is going to be have some kind of protection around these systems. I'm going to guess that it probably got on via some kind of removable thumb drive or similar type of thing, because that's how we usually see these things walk in to classified spaces like this.
Yeah. So did they say that it's a classified environment where these things are operating?
I don't know if it's classified or if it's secured. I can't remember what they say exactly. I'm sure it's not an area that anybody can just walk into, obviously, but I'm sure there's certain kinds of protections around it to prevent any kind of network interaction from the internet side and whatnot. Also, the other thing that's kind of interesting, this isn't the first time that the Predator drones have had some kind of security vulnerability. I think it was back in 2009. There was a story that came out where I think it was Iraqi surgeons were actually able to intercept and get video footage off of the Predators because they weren't encrypting the video footage on it. It's a little bit different story, same ultimate, target here that we're talking about, but another interesting aspect of how these systems, even though they're very complicated, use a lot of underlying technology that, as everybody's becoming a lot more technologically capable and can do things for very inexpensive costs, such as, intercepting the video footage was pretty cheap. I think it cost like a $30 card that they had to put into their machine in order to be able to intercept it and save it. So, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll digress for a moment here. Jim, I know you're a pilot on the side here. Are you familiar with and have you used Microsoft Flight Simulator?
Not in a long time. I used it many, many years ago, but I haven't used it recently.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame. It seems to have fallen off in terms of popularity, but I haven't been a pilot myself some time ago. Absolutely. This, I kind of wonder, I've been speculating about this for a while. John, you thought it was a little bit surprising that a Windows operating system would be used for these control systems. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if there's some shared code associated with Microsoft Flight Simulator as a starting point. You mentioned yourself that a lot of this is built up from commercial technology. So I'm merely speculating on that topic, but that was a very, for procedural practice, anybody that happens to be a pilot, by the way, for procedural practice, particularly if you're developing planning for and practicing for an instrument rating, Microsoft Flight Simulator was a very good, very inexpensive tool for being able to work through that. Not very good representation of how an airplane flies, but certainly in terms of learning how to do the procedures correctly, that sort of thing. But as I said, I digress. One of the things that I was kind of curious about, I don't think it's been disclosed, but certainly, John, you've mentioned that this is most likely a secure environment. So even though the infection existed, most likely the command and control and the opportunity to be able to steal any credentials off that machine would probably have been blocked by the environment where it's operating. I certainly should hope so.
Yeah, I would hope so, too.
Yeah. And, nevertheless, I guess one of the other things, they had mentioned that it was a little difficult. They were having trouble removing the infection. I took that to as an interpretation that this might have been one of these master boot record infections. Has there been any insight into that?
I haven't personally heard any particular insight on the exact infection. That's very possible. I mean, we know ourselves from our own experience, the MBR type infections such as TDSS, TIDSERV, very difficult to remove if you don't have a good tool to do it and or the skill to get rid of it. So that's possible, but I don't know that, if that's the case here.
All right, very good. For something like this, they may not have a system that they can come in that's fresh and just replace it. So they've been reluctant to make any significant changes when they're in the middle of operational missions and have determined that there's not really a derogatory effect to their operations. So in any case, this has a lot of interesting nuances associated with it, and I am sure that those storage drives are going to be scannable better in the future as well.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you have, John?
Yeah, the other story I have is another interesting one that came out within the past few days here. There has been reported, actually the Chaos Computer Club, which is a pretty well-known European hacker group. They have a convention every year, and they reported that they found this malware that's out there being deployed on, they found it deployed on people's computer systems in Germany, and it is a state-sponsored by law enforcement, German law enforcement, to be put on there. The Germans law enforcement has subsequently come out and acknowledged that this is the case, that this is within the legal bounds, and actually have I put a lot of legal disclaimer in here, but some of the legal things that are different probably than we have in the United States here, but they actually have a law that says the government there is allowed to intercept of encrypted telecommunications. It's a legally authorized law enforcement measure to fight against serious crime that they have. The legal restriction is that they can only use these types of tools on people's computer systems to record voice calls, and it can't do other things like eavesdrop on what's going on in the room, et cetera, because it's similar capability. Usually if you're using Skype or something for your VoIP call, it's recording from a microphone, so really it's the same source. So they could technically listen to what's going on in the room. So anyway, Chaos Computer Club got a sample of this. Subsequently, F-Secure Kaspersky has taken a look at the capabilities of this tool. It goes under a few names, depending on who's analyzed it. Quellen TKU is probably the most notable name or known name, because that's the official name from the vendor that the German government contracted to create this, but also goes under Zero Saptis, Bundestrojaner, and R2D2. It has a lot of capability. It can do keystroke logging for Internet Explorer, Firefox, Opera, ICQ, Microsoft Messenger, Yahoo Messenger, and also it can record the voice calls for Skype, regular VoIP, Counterpath X-Lite, which is another VoIP type of software. It's a soft phone, and PalTalk. And for a lot of these ones like Skype, it's not really decrypting the conversation, the Skype conversation. It's just recording whatever's going on at the microphone and speaker system. So that's how they do it, from a low interaction type of aspect, so they can listen to what's going on there. But they also found, the antivirus vendors found that it can do a lot more than just record voice calls, obviously, because it's doing this keystroke logging for your browsers and whatnot and your chat programs. But it can record what's going on from the microphone and the camera. It can turn the camera on, take screenshots of the computer, take screenshots of what's going on in the room, listen to what's going on in the room. It can upload other applications to the computer. So there's a lot of extra functionality that is not within the legal guidelines. So German authorities are saying they're looking into this. They've launched an investigation, et cetera. It's an interesting story, in my opinion. Different countries have different laws on what they can do and what legal boundaries they're allowed to cross. This one kind of surprised me. I was kind of taken aback that they had such, they had such ability to do this kind of thing, legally within their country. But it doesn't come here.
Yeah, so there are really two aspects of this. One is that this is perhaps a very good demonstration of some of the things that can be done if maldoers were to choose to do that. And I guess in most of the cases, what we tend to see in the malware that we're analyzing on a day-to-day basis, are cases where they're trying to capture user credentials, but there's nothing preventing them from turning on a webcam and doing other activities, perhaps just searching out homes that you might want, an attacker might want to literally physically rob. So these are kinds of things that we need to be paying attention to as from a technology point of view. I think the other aspect of this is that it's just plain important that there are proper checks and balances, that tools like this or any other type of monitoring mechanism that's used in a legal way has the proper checks and balances to make sure that they can't be or are not being abused in practice. Thanks for that, John. So that enlightening in more than one way, I feel at least.
Yeah.
Next item here, let's go ahead and take a look at the CyberThreat weather report for the week. We'll take a look at what's been going on in the Internet for the last week or so. And we have a few things to talk about. A few of these things are related, so I tried to sort of associate those, and there are a couple of them that are of interest but not particularly security threatening. So we have an old friend here on port 23. Port 23 is being scanned. There's been a little change in the activity there, so we'll take a look at that. We have a few ports here that are alarming in terms of the volume of activity that we're seeing, in particular volume of flows. This happens to be source port 46049, 46045, and 46050. It turns out to have a pretty strong profile of backscatter associated with denial of service attacks. I think last week we reported on a similar set of activity where it was actually port 0 TCP that was the source port. So we'll take a look at that and see what it looks like. Just in the last couple of days, we've seen a significant increase in scanning activity on port 80 TCP, and this appears to be related to also an increase in scanning activity on port 8080 TCP. So we'll take a quick look at that. Just pointing out here right away on port 80, we see an increase in terms of flows, packets, source IPs, as well as sources. That's a slightly different measurement of how we keep track of the number of sources that are doing the scanning. So lots of attributes that are triggering alarms on that one. The next one here, an old friend, port 5900. We'll take a look at what's going on there. Not a significant change in activity, but at least of interest. And last, not a real significant amount of activity, a little intermittent scanning activity on port 60 TCP. So we'll take a quick look at that as well. So let's take a look at port 23. We've been talking about this for several weeks now, and in fact, I'm showing about 120 days of activity in terms of history. And the activity, generally speaking, is consistent with what we've been seeing in the past several weeks. We have seen a small increase in activity over the last couple of days. So we're looking at the number of sources that are scanning on port 23. This is on an hourly basis. And as you can see here, as of yesterday, actually perhaps 2 days ago, we did see sort of an uptick in the number of sources that are scanning. And I did take a look at that, and it looks like a little bit of a resurgence of what we've been reporting before. That is, we're still seeing about an 84% distribution. That is, most of the sources that are doing the scanning are from a particular provider in Korea. So whereas we've seen a, sort of a long tail and a downward trend in activity, a little bit of an upward tick. We'll keep an eye on that. Hopefully that's not a trend, just a short change in activity. The next one, as I mentioned, some related activity on port 46,049, 46,050, and 46,045. There may, in fact, be some other ports associated with this, but they didn't make it into our top changers in terms of change. So there may be, in fact, some others, but in this case, what we're seeing is SYNAC flags on these flows. Basically, that's an indication that they are responses to a set of activity. This is based on source port activity, so that's also consistent with that suggestion. Very indicative of a backscatter associated with denial of service attacks. And as you can see here, there are some time correlation relationships associated with these. And the last thing I'll point out is that based on the addresses that are sourcing the SYNAC activity, it looks like those addresses are under attack. And there are multiple addresses, but they're in very close proximity to each other, so very suggestive of perhaps the same organization as a target of attack, but not specifically the same addresses at all times. The next set of activity, this is probably the most significant to pay attention to, is that we've seen a significant increase in the number of sources that we're scanning on port 80. There's a correlating, very relatively strong time correlation in the increase in number of sources that are scanning on port 8080 as well. We didn't detect it as the same number, but there may be some pretty good overlap in terms of the actual source addresses that are doing this scanning. Interesting, the sources are primarily in the United States and China. There wasn't really a very strong indication that one source or another, in terms of country, that is predominant in this particular case. And then another sort of interesting observation here is it looks like some, if not a reasonably large number of those, are associated with cloud services. So this is perhaps suggestive that some sort of vulnerability has been found in a cloud service or multiple cloud service providers, perhaps in the virtualization of some sort. That's conjecture on my part, but it looks like a number of the sources here are associated with a cloud service. It is also possible that perhaps those services were simply bought through some sort of mechanism and used for scanning purposes. But what I would recommend in this case is pay careful attention if you're operating a web server, particularly if you're using a cloud service provider. Take a look at that and make sure that you are not the source of scanning activity. Look for any other indications that you might have some sort of problem associated with that. Next item, as I mentioned, we've been talking about port 5900 for a while now. This is virtual network computing. This is consistent with what we reported last week, that is most of the sources and most of the probes are coming from providers in Korea and Ukraine. And it's not really a significant uptick in terms of the amount of activity, but this is what we're looking at here is the number of sources that are scanning on that port. There may be some relationship to some other scanning activity as well. I'm not showing a strong correlation here, but as you can see here, I'm showing, the last, looks like about 3 months of activity here, and you can see that in October in particular, we have, a significantly more prominent set of spikes and more frequent and larger spikes associated with the number of sources scanning on this port increasing. And then last on this list, I pointed out earlier, some intermittent scanning activity on port 60 TCP. We haven't been able to associate this with a specific application. Basically, what we're seeing is a single source from China that's doing the scanning activity. That address doesn't appear to be doing other scanning activity, but there are some nearby addresses that are scanning on other ports. So, and some of the others appear to be related to proxy applications and such. So I don't know if there's a strong relationship there, but certainly clearly, if you have services that are running on port 60, or if you find services that are running on port 60 that you didn't plan on being there, that would be something that obviously you want to pay attention to. And then the next thing, I just wanted to give a little bit of an update on activity that we're seeing in terms of scanning activity overall. What we've talked about up to this point has been indications of the most change activity, but we have some continuous activity that's taking place. First, the top 10 most sources probing. That is, this is looking at the number of source addresses that are doing probing on these ports. And as pretty much always, port 45 is at the top of the list here. That's generally associated with a configure worm. There are some other botnets that are using similar types of exploits that is looking for weak file shares, the same exploits that have been used in the configure, original configure version A worm that was propagating. You can see other ports that are pretty standard here. We talked about port 23, 3389 is still on the list here. Port 22, SSH is still on the list here. We talked about port 80. And then another one I want to make a special note of is port 1433 TCP. I should also sort of emphasize port 80 as well. What's interesting here is look at how small the number of sources are for these particular 2 ports. They basically just made it onto the top 10 list. But as we look at a different perspective, that is the most probes on those ports, that is, from those sources to these ports. 1433, port 80, have both come up to be significantly prominent in the last week or so. I think last week we talked about 1433 making it to the top of the list. And port 445 is becoming less prominent in terms of the number of probes that we're seeing. Now, this is looking at 1 day's worth of data. So it's basically a snapshot from yesterday, but it does indicate some significant change in the demographics of what we typically have seen in terms of scanning activity. And I do want to make a note, port 133 UDP is shown on here, but that is not security relevant. It just happens to get picked up in our activity. And since 1433 has been sort of on the radar here, I just wanted to give a sort of a longer-term view of this. That port is associated with Microsoft SQL database. And looking at the last year of activity, you can see that right around the end of April, that's when probing on this port seemed to become of greater interest. I don't know if there was a specific vulnerability associated with that. Generally, what we've seen is that this appears to be associated with password guessing activities. So clearly, if you have Microsoft SQL exposed on the Internet, you want to pay attention to that. And as always, I should point out that there's the possibility that some of this automated scanning activity could leak into an enterprise. So even within an enterprise, you need to be sensitive to having strong passwords and making sure that vulnerabilities are patched. Because if you got this, automated scanning, there is a possibility that command and control associated with this could get out through an enterprise firewall and be an active participant in a botnet.
Hey, Brian, related to the port 80 scanning, and this is just conjecture in my opinion, but a story that didn't get onto my list of things to cover today is there was a story that came out within the past few days that there is a mass SQL injection type of activity going on, an attack against ASP websites. It's related to that Liza Moon one. That happened probably, I think it was earlier this year. I can't remember when it actually happened. But basically it looks for ASP websites that it can do this particular SQL injection attack from. Scanning may have something to do with that, although we have seen that a lot of these SQL injection attacks usually like to use Google to find specific targets that they can use that are indexed and they know that they're ASP before they even get to them, so they don't even have to scan. But it may be related. I don't know.
Okay.
So I thought I'd throw that out there.
That's very good input. I certainly wasn't aware of that. Thank you, John. All righty. Any last comments before we close out today?
I was just going to comment about, you talking about the scanning that seems to be coming from cloud, and I had read that cloud could be a new attack vector for the different the different attackers, because it offers them a lot of resources, and it's potentially easier for them to get at than individual machines, for botnets and things like that. So cloud providers have to put in some safeguards to help protect against that, but that gives the potential for a much larger attack source.
Yeah, very good, Dave. That's a good observation here. This is one of the sort of hidden aspects of cloud services, in my opinion. That is, cloud services. If an attacker can take a stolen credit card, buy a whole bunch of computing resources, and use that to perform exploits or do some other criminal activity, that certainly is an easy way to go. And as you suggested, the cloud service provider needs to have some mechanism in place to make sure that isn't happening. And in fact, I'll just use this as a opportunity to plug a little blog that I'd put out on our Networking Exchange blog some time ago, related to exactly that sort of subject. That is, if you are using a cloud service provider that harbors criminals on IP addresses that you share or are next to you, that puts you at risk of getting blocked in the process of, trying to protect against malicious activities emanating from those IP addresses. So it is in your interest that if you're buying cloud services to ask them the question, what do they do to prevent criminals from using their service? And I'll once again thank you for that opportunity to plug there, Dave. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So with that, thanks for joining us on the program today. As always, if you have questions or feedback, you can contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. You can reach this program on the AT&T Tech channel. That's techchannel.att.com. Just look for the under our shows, the Cyber Threat Report. And you can also get this as a podcast, an audio podcast from iTunes, as well as you can get it on YouTube. Just search for the AT&T Cyber Threat Report. Thank you, Jim, Dave, and John, for joining us today. And thank you, our listeners and viewers, for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad, and on behalf of all of us here, keep your network safe.